Greetings. My name is Matthew Stader, and I'm a Cardinal with the Ecumenical Order of Christ. This is an open message to Senator Pauline Hanson, Councillor Jacinta Price, Mark Latham, Sam Newman, and the citizens of Australia as well. Now, whether or not you can see it, the growing movement in our country promoting the idea of Invasion Day in place of Australia Day is reaching a point where it will have a constantly active negative influence on our day-to-day lives, not just on the 26th of January. Now, this is not to mention the growing prevalence of the social cancer that is political correctness. Whilst the concept of Invasion Day may not be directly caused by political correctness, the former is almost certainly a consequence of the latter. The claim has been made that Captain Cook acted inappropriately in his initial surveying of the Eastern Australian coastline. However, the only record of the events available to us shows that Cook acted exactly according to the guidelines he was mandated to operate within. For one, there were no visible signs of habitation along the coastline. Now, that alone requires that he declare the land terra nullius, or no man's land. This is the standards that the British government required of their officers. And two, when the first hostile physical interaction between the Indigenous people and the British did occur, it was initiated not by the British, but by the Indigenous people. This initial hostility is recorded as having occurred several months after settlement, and as I said, it was initiated by the natives when they slaughtered 5 civilians for the horrendous crime of fishing. Now, from there, it seems the hostilities only escalated, despite Governor Arthur Phillip's insistence that every attempt to keep things as peaceful as possible must be made. Now, that's even after he himself was injured by spearing. Hostility of the situation did rise to a boiling point, and atrocities were committed by both sides. It must be pointed out that from a modern perspective, the conflict in general appears very one-sided. That's hard to argue, but you have to keep in mind that is due to the superiority of European weaponry. This, however, doesn't take into account the advantages that the Indigenous people had in moving around the countryside. They were familiar with the landscape, the plants, the surroundings. They were able to use it to their advantage and blend in, become almost invisible. This, flowing on from that, would allow them to use the element of surprise very effectively. Now, that said, the Indigenous people alive today have suffered none of those said atrocities, just as none of the European descent citizens of Australia are responsible for those same atrocities. Yet every day, this growing movement of hate is convincing other people, as well as reinforcing the idea in their own minds, that every white person is responsible for the crimes that they themselves have never suffered from. The only thing these people have suffered is extensive financial assistance from the government, both in regular benefits on a fortnightly basis, as well as low-cost loans for homes and other things. And now, this is in addition to preferential treatment in education, employment, and healthcare. Now, the claim is also made that the Indigenous people are entitled to these things on the basis that they are the original inhabitants of the country. There is historical evidence, both documented and photographic, which disproves this claim, but has been essentially swept under the rug. The most notable of this evidence are photographs from a village that existed in the Daintree rainforest up until at least the early 1930s. There is also mention I have found that it appeared in high school textbooks up until maybe the 50s. a group generally referred to as Australian Pygmies, not related to the Indigenous people that we are familiar with today. Now, this at least proves that the people we know as the original inhabitants of this land are not the only ones to have called Australia home prior to 1788. In addition to this, although it is politically not correct to say it, the entire population of Australia does need to know. The Invasion Day movement is calling for the Commonwealth of Australia to be abolished. To do so formally and legally, the movement is challenging the legitimacy of the Australian government and its laws. Now, this would ultimately mean that it would have to be handled in an international court under Admiralty law. Since their main argument is obviously that European presence in Australia stemmed from an invasion, they would legally have to be recognised as a conquered people, is the term. Now, this means that from the very moment the claim of an invasion is recognised, they become legally conquered people. So at least for the period that the rest of the case is being addressed, the federal government of Australia is no longer obliged or required to provide the Indigenous people of Australia with anything. Now, in light of the fact that this supposed invasion brought into the lives of the Aboriginal people agriculture, fresh water on demand, toilets, permanent dwellings, and eventually as well electricity and telecommunications, as well as making available to them an advanced level of healthcare. In light of this, one would think that the crimes that were committed against their ancestors 2 centuries ago by people who are long dead would be permitted to fade from memory. Now, there is also the formal apology to the Aboriginal people that was given by the Australian government in 2008, which seems to count for nothing in the eyes of the Invasion Day movement. Personally, I fail to understand how the apology from only 10 years ago can be completely disregarded, but events committed by people long dead still seem to sit at the front of their minds. Now, just like many other nations of the Western world, ours is currently witnessing the growth of a minority movement which literally has the potential and apparently the intent to destroy society as we know it. Now, many may disagree with my claim. They're free to. But given that they are a minority group, is the basis of that claim, but it is the squeaky wheel that gets the grease. I'm sure we're all familiar with that adage. And so long as no one is willing to stand in opposition to their hateful message with a unified front of logic, facts, and a willingness to look at both sides of the story, the Invasion Day movement will get exactly what they are pushing for. To the best of my knowledge, there are several people who openly have a viewpoint similar, in some ways at least, to mine, namely, as I mentioned before, Pauline Hanson, Jacinta Price, Mark Latham and Sam Newman. I will be attempting to contact them and others directly in the near future. Hopefully, I pray, before this destructive movement does any further damage to our nation. If you find this message resonates with your own views on the subject, or you can see the truth of it, please do not hesitate to contact me using the details that you'll be able to find in the description. I think that's it. Apart from, I'd just like to say, this is not a message motivated by racism or hatred, nor am I condoning the crimes conducted by military forces of the British government 2 centuries ago. The message I am trying to promote is not to forget the past, no, but to acknowledge it in a constructive way. Then hopefully we can let go and, if possible, move forward into the future as a unified nation. I thank you for your time, and I pray this message makes its mark in redirecting this country from the destructive path we are currently on, dwelling on the mistakes of the past, moving into a peaceful future instead. As countrymen brought together on common ground, I thank you for your time, and I pray this message finds you well. Thank you again.